We have a oh yes, we are going to be recording this meeting. So if you don't want to be on camera, please turn your camera off. We will be posting it on our YouTube channel so that other people can enjoy the presentation and learn. We will be having a Q&A from 6 to 6:30, and we will stop the recording then. So any questions that you ask or the responses, those won't be recorded. Yeah, so from 5 to 6, we'll have the presentation. 6 to 6:30, we'll have the Q&A and the panel discussion at the end. Our presentation sections are about YAC, just kind of an overview of what YAC is and who we are as a committee and what we do. Second, we have our policies and an overview of kind of how we run our space. Kind of give, in the next section, integrating youth, kind of give a rundown of how to integrate youth into your spaces and the different pillars of what we think is most important and what are the key action, like what are the key ways to do that. Number 4, being an adult ally and how you can do that effectively. Ways to do that. We're going to hear from 2 of our awesome and favorite adult allies of YAC who have been great for us, Valley and Chelsea. And then number 5, actionable items so that you can learn how you can do these things or not do things in your spaces and integrate youth into your spaces and promote engagement for youth in your spaces. And then for the Q&A, we'll have expectations, so how to ask questions and what kind of expectations are for that, and then the discussion. So first, about YAC. My name is Phoebe Dominguez and Riley Ruff. We are the co-chairs. I am a freshman in high school. Riley is a senior in college at CSU. Yeah, so as a committee, 350 Colorado Committee, the Youth Action Committee, is a team of youth that organizes to discuss the climate crisis in Colorado and what we can do about it. We use methods such as phone banking, petitions, trainings like this, webinars, planning events, and we do that all with specifically youth power and energy. So our team that is like our specific leadership people are Riley Ruff, Lillian Smith, myself, and Madeline. Riley Ruff is the co-chair. Riley works on making sure YAC runs smoothly and safely. They focus on building a strong community. YAC has been promoting team building and fun in YAC. Lillian, our social media director, she helps run and lead our Instagram and promotional material. She designs graphics and countless efforts for countless stuff and YAC events. She is super great, and we're sad that she can't be here today. Myself, I make sure that YAC runs smoothly and safely, just like Riley. I work on planning events and organizing within YAC, as well as engaging in one-on-ones and leading meetings. Madeline leads all of our outreach efforts. She connects with other organizations and schools to promote partnerships and collaboration. Even though we only have 4 people on this slide, we have such a great team and so many people working with us in YAC, as you can see on our today. And we are so grateful for all of them. And I love them all with my whole heart. So our policies, 2 of our main pillars in YAC that we're going to be talking about more today and we think are very, very helpful and very important if you want youth to be safe and have a good time in your space, are a zero tolerance policy. Our policy is that we do not tolerate any homophobia, transphobia, racism, sexism, ableism, or xenophobia of any kind. We commit to showing up authentically, holding space for each other's challenges and triumphs, as well as being unconditionally respectful of how each of us identifies. And in that, we make sure that if someone is violating that, we don't hesitate to remove people from spaces, as well as make sure that people are understanding our policies and why we don't do that. And then our other policy is self-care. We prioritize self-care and support each other through community care. We realize burnout must be actively combated in organizing spaces for the benefit of the larger movement. We create a supportive, replenishing, and regenerative space through music, movement, readings, and mindfulness. We strive to have fun and be productive at the same time. So like our zero tolerance policy, we want to give you a policy for today. So how should you show up in this space? And I'm going to pass it over to Valley to tell you how you're going to show up in this space today.
Thank you, Phoebe. Yeah, I'm just going to kind of extend out what Phoebe just said a little bit for the meeting today, just kind of a brief statement. I would like to first and foremost foreground that this is meant to be a safe space for the youth that are putting on this event. And as we listen to the content today, some of you here on the Zoom call may feel challenged, and this is not necessarily a bad thing. But I just want to say that if you do feel that way and you do have comments or questions, there is space for Q&A at the end. We ask that you don't interrupt and really make space for the youth that are presenting. And please do not engage in combative or argumentative behavior, because as Phoebe said, that will not be tolerated, unfortunately. And people that do engage in that would be removed from the Zoom call. One of the reasons we're holding this webinar is because of a history of tokenism, disregard, and violence, both physical and emotion, that youth have faced as activists. And we want to be mindful that some of the youth on this call may already feel anxious about presenting this content. And we ask that participants, which I do notice a lot of them are not youth, which is great and is fantastic, and we're so happy that you're here, but please be respectful, aware, and conscious of the nature of this environment. Thank you.
Yes, thank you so much, Valley. Yeah, make sure that we're holding true to that while we do this. All right. Oh. I'm going to pass it to Riley.
Hi, everyone. Thank you so much for being here this evening. I am on tech tonight, so if we have any issues, I'm so sorry. I'm working to resolve them as we're moving here. As I mentioned, I'm the co-chair of the Youth Action Committee. I've been involved with youth activism for over 6 years. And I'm going to talk a little bit about integrating youth and why and how this is important. So to kick us off here, I want to open this up for reflection and just a little bit of kind of chat discussion. I would love if everyone could drop a word or two in the chat that comes up when you think about integrating or involving youth. This might be things, at least for me, this involves empowerment, passion, and I would love to see the chat kind of going off here with some things that feel related to integrating and involving youth. I love this. I see high energy, creating connections, great ideas, love. These are all amazing. Keep them coming. Unity, I really like that. No tokenism, passion. I love seeing everyone's immediate thoughts. Thank you all for participating. Memes. Okay, yeah, awesome. Fun, absolutely. Collaboration. Yeah, letting youth decide. Absolutely. Stand behind. That's a great one. Innovative. This is amazing. Thank you all so much for these thoughts. I think this is really important because it allows us to see where we're at and also to think critically about why integrating youth is important. So I appreciate y'all sharing these ideas and please keep them coming absolutely as we move forward here. Oh my goodness. There we go. So we have all of these lovely ideas and thoughts in the chat, and I want to take a moment to really just ground down at a definition of integrating youth. So for this evening, the definition of integrating youth we'll be using is safely including youth in all spaces within our organization without hesitation or judgment. And I want to draw some attention to a couple different words in this phrase, the first being safely. We're going to talk a lot about what safety looks like for youth, and that can be physical safety as well as emotional safety. So please keep in mind that safety is duly noted in that fashion. And I also want to draw attention to our last phrase here, without hesitation or judgment. And we will definitely delve into this further during our presentation, but integrating youth should not be an afterthought. It should be done seamlessly, and that's why we're here tonight, to learn how we can do that. So continuing to move forward, I want to talk a little bit about why this is important. And I'm sure if you are in the climate organizing space, you're very familiar with youth taking the lead on different actions, as well as vocalizing support for policies or speaking out against certain policies. These are all things that have become very prominent in the climate movement. And I want to highlight that this is our future as youth. This is the world that we are inheriting and are going to have to live with. And I think a sentiment that's shared among our entire Youth Action Committee is that we are going to keep fighting for what we want until we get it. And that is an equitable future. That is a just future. And we are going to continue to fight the climate crisis until we can't anymore. I also want to highlight that youth hold a unique and valuable perspective on the world and on our communities. We are visionaries, activists, and artists. We also have skills, knowledge, and passion to drive change in our communities. And these are the same communities that will ultimately be ours someday. We are inheriting the world and shaping the world that we want to see as youth activists. So I'm going to talk a little bit about the pillars of youth involvement, and these each represent a section that we'll be delving into during this webinar. But if you're here, you're obviously interested in learning about youth and activism and learning about how to integrate youth. So we're going to talk a little bit about that. We have 5 different pillars of youth involvement. The first one is implement a strict no tolerance policy. I'm going to dive into that in just a second. The second one is be an upstander. The third is offer resources. The fourth is call in youth. And the fifth is actively combat burnout. So our entire Youth Action Committee is going to go through and speak to each of these, but we're going to start with implementing a strict no tolerance policy. So Phoebe touched a little bit on this at the beginning, where they kind of highlighted one of, or I guess 2 of our policies that we hold very dear in YAC. What you see on your screen in front of you is the direct language from the Youth Action Committee's structure document. This is what Phoebe and I pulled together. This is what we introduce YAC as in every single space we are a part of. And I would love if everyone could just take a second and read the language that we have up on the screen here. I want to highlight that this is our inclusivity and acceptance statement. This is our no tolerance policy. And as a committee, we adhere to this very strictly. We value every single individual that comes to our space, and this ties directly into creating a safe space for everyone. So as Phoebe mentioned, we do not hesitate to ask somebody to leave, to ask somebody to step away, or to speak up if somebody is perpetuating harm. Safety, as I mentioned, is both physical and emotional. We often are talking about emotional safety in this context, and that means ensuring that everyone feels welcome, seen, and heard. And any sort of perpetuation of harm does exactly the opposite of that. So by implementing a no tolerance policy, we work to ensure that every single one of our spaces is safe for everyone involved. Now, of course, there are potential issues to arise when doing this, and I want to take a second to highlight that conflict is an opportunity. So when we are addressing anything that might go against our inclusivity policy, that is something that needs to be spoken up against, we are always respectful in resolving that conflict and explaining harm. And if an individual is asked to leave a space, there will always be follow-up to reconnect and mend the situation. Conflict is not something that needs to be isolating or alienating. We want it to be an opportunity to learn and grow. In addition, we practice nonviolent direct action and utilize nonviolent communication when handling conflict. This goes directly back to ensuring that every space we are a part of is safe, and we want to make sure that each individual in our spaces feels safe. And you cannot have a productive committee, you cannot have a productive youth integration initiative without this. And that brings me next to being an upstander. And I'm going to pass it to Contessa to talk a little bit more about this.
Yeah, thanks, Riley. So I'll be talking about what it means to be an upstander. So the definition that we have on the slide is a person who speaks or acts in support of an individual or cause, particularly someone who intervenes on behalf of the person who is being attacked or bullied. So being an upstander is the opposite of being a bystander. And upstanders speak up for others. They know when to step up or step back in a situation. And being an upstander is a great way to be an effective ally. And I want to reiterate that this is an effective ally for anyone, not just youth. And this connects to our no tolerance policy and that culture that we try to hold in youth spaces. I'll go to the next slide. Thank you. So yeah, the first aspect of being an upstander is to be curious and not judgmental. So I'm going to pass this to Phoebe to explain this quote a little bit.
Yeah, so if any of you have seen Ted Lasso, it's a great show and everyone should watch it, by the way. It's super great. And in one of the scenes, I think in season 1, he talks about, he has this whole monologue about stuff. And at the end, he kind of talking about how he was bullied as a kid. And he realized, and he saw this quote on the wall, and he realized that all of the people who were bullying him were not curious, they were judgmental. And so I think that this kind of, I put this on this slide because I think it's important to hold when thinking about these things and these themes and being an upstander is you as a person, we are very judgmental and we're very protective, and instead of being judgmental and guarded or defensive, we should be curious and open.
Yes, incredible. So yeah, being curious is so important, and you can be curious by asking questions like, what do you mean by that statement? Could you elaborate on that? And these are great tools to gain a better understanding of someone's perspective and not assuming that they don't have good intentions, and also assessing if there's any action that needs to be taken related to what someone said. And I'm going to send a TED Talk in the chat. I don't have it copied right now, so I'm going to send it after my section, but I would recommend you all watch it. It's called On Being Wrong. And yeah, it just helps people get more comfortable with that idea and not be so argumentative and being open to having opinions that aren't necessarily right. And yeah, I wanted to emphasize that having bias causes blind spots. And in the Youth Action Committee, we understand that oppression is systemic and that ideas are inherited through social systems. So we don't hold anyone, like we hold people accountable, but we're not like shaming anyone for these ideas. We just really want to create an open space to be able to talk through these things and hold an understanding that, you know, it's not anyone's fault that they believe these things, but we just want to emphasize being open to learning other perspectives and other experiences in order to kind of combat that. And also want to address that, you know, most people aren't aware of their bias. You know, a lot of bias can be explicit or implicit, but, you know, some people don't know that they have a bias unless it's addressed. And so that is why we are also focusing on that. And it's important to not assume negative intentions when anyone says something that may be harmful. and understanding that, well, holding space for that, but also in understanding intent versus impact. So even if you have good intentions in what you said, it might impact someone in a negative way, and being able to balance both of those and focusing more on the impact rather than like, oh, well, I meant like I had good intentions, because that's just kind of deflecting and not addressing something that needs to be addressed and caused harm. So also going off of that, not addressing something harmful perpetuates harm, and avoiding conflict or not saying something in a difficult situation may be easier, but in doing so, we are continuing to let harmful ideas circulate by not addressing them. So when we're focusing on these ideas or addressing something that's harmful, it's important to keep in mind that we have to be able to embrace discomfort. So if I say something that's harmful and someone's going to call me out for it, I'm going to be uncomfortable with that. I'm going to have to look, you know, what I said, like straight in the face and be like, wow, I said that and that hurt someone. And that's an uncomfortable feeling for me. But we need to be able to embrace that discomfort in order to move forward and not perpetuate those types of harms anymore and be open to learning. So it's all a balance. Yes, and addressing oppressive or harmful statements halts harm and creates a space for inclusivity. So when we're not addressing harmful statements, we do not have an inclusive space, and it's important to keep that in mind. And also, you know, if we have people who have privilege in a space, if someone says something that's harmful and people who have the privilege aren't addressing it, then it puts the pressure on the people who have those oppressed identities to address that harm, which isn't inclusive as well. So keeping that in mind, and yeah, moving on to how to address harm, because it's hard. So there's a couple different ways that this can be done. And I wanted to talk about calling in versus calling out and addressing harm. So calling someone in for a harmful statement that they said would look like, you know, they said it in a situation, there were other people there, and you, the facilitator, or whoever wants to address that, is going to pull them aside into a private space at a later time to address that and say, hey, you know, I heard that you said this, and I think that, you know, this may be something harmful to say, and, you know, maybe we should try to do something else next time. So that's what calling is. And then calling out is kind of the opposite. So it's addressing the harm in the moment in front of everyone who is a witness to it. So it's necessary to understand when calling in is appropriate and when calling out is appropriate. And I will say calling out is more necessary when harm needs to be stopped to prevent like further harm from occurring, and when it is important for everyone in the space to know that that was harmful. So it's all situational, and you have to decide what would be best. And then another important aspect for being an upstander is to identify privilege in the identities that we hold. And each of us hold privileged identities. So we need to recognize that first, and recognize that our privileged identities affect how we show up in the world and how we are treated. And through identifying those our privileges and thinking critically about how we show up in the world is crucial to creating a more inclusive space and being an upstander as well. So, thank you. So when thinking about privilege, we need to understand that privilege exists as a result of oppression to other groups. So if we didn't have oppression, we wouldn't have privilege. And if we didn't have privilege, then we wouldn't have oppression. So it kind of reframes how we think about privilege in our mind, because it's framed as an advantage, right? But you only have that advantage as a cost to another group. So it kind of makes you not want to have that advantage anymore and just like level everything out so that no one has harm related to that. But yeah, so the Youth Action Committee works to operate intersectionally and acknowledges the dual-sided nature of privilege and oppression in our spaces. And then because we do have privileged identities and we can also have oppressed identities, we need to learn to balance those. So we need to recognize our privileged identities and our marginalized identities and be able to balance the relationship between the two. And in order to do that, you need to first identify what identities that you hold, but then also in a situation, you need to understand the situation, how you should show up, and when you can cause harm and when you have been harmed. And when you're causing harm, you need to lean into your privileged identity and take accountability. And then when you're being harmed, like that's when you lean into your marginalized identity. But don't lean into your marginalized identity when you're causing harm, and vice versa, just because, you know, every situation is different and it's important to be able to balance those ideas. Yes, and then the next section is offer resources, and I'll pass it over to Riley to talk about those.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, I'm going to talk a little bit about offering resources as a mechanism for integrating youth into your spaces. So a lot of times when we think about different resources, there's often a discrepancy between the resources that adults have access to versus the resources that youth have access to. And one of the ways that you can immediately work to reduce this inequity is sharing resources with youth. That ultimately does create a power dynamic between adults and youth. However, when you are sharing resources with youth, instead of sharing them in a way that's, hey, here's a resource that is specifically designated for youth, work in a way that empowers youth to take on that role. So for a little bit of context, resources can be anything from mentorships, professional development, offering rides to events, providing funding for youth events. All of these things fall under the umbrella of resources. And these are all some things that youth often have limited to no access to in spaces like organizing, spaces like activism. So what can you do? You can share these resources with youth in your circle and encourage them to use them. So instead of offering mentorship in a way that is condescending, that perpetuates the power imbalance between adult and youth, you're offering mentorship in a way that equalizes the playing field to say, hey, I have so much to learn from youth as an adult, and youth have so much to learn from me as an adult. So sharing resources is not a one-way street, but instead it is a way for people to work synchronously, to work together, to be able to perpetuate whatever movement you are working towards. Additionally, other resources include education. So things like resume building, how to network, sharing opportunities, giving funding or fundraising to youth groups, youth NGOs and community resources. All of these things are resources that youth greatly benefit from. And if you have access to them, sharing them with any youth in your circles, especially if that's something they're interested and passionate about, can be a great way of starting to integrate youth into your spaces. I am going to pass it to Emma to talk about what calling in youth looks like.
Hi, everyone. Yeah, thank you, Riley. So for calling in youth, we're going to start off with this quote from Greta Thunberg, which is, "We can no longer let people in power decide what hope is." And so for how to call in youth, calling in youth means actively asking for youth perspectives. And so once you have youth in your spaces and you have the procedures in place to protect them, it's important to ask youth in your community to come to events and to come to meetings, and that's what calling in youth means. And then what comes simultaneously with calling in youth is to be listening. So it's not enough just to call in youth and want them to be there, but you have to truly be listening to their perspectives and have the desire to understand what they're saying and really listen to their voice. And then you can amplify youth voices and empower them by asking them to speak, facilitate in meetings for like whole or parts of meetings, and also ask them to lead events. Youth are perfectly capable of being in positions of power and positions of decision-making and leading, and it's important to offer them those opportunities so that they're not just checking a box in your space, but they're truly empowered to have power in that space and to offer their ideas and their skills to your space. And then another vital part of calling in youth is to acknowledge that they have a unique and invaluable perspective. And so they often hold an outlook on the world that's different from adults. This is our world that we are inheriting, and it's our job to advocate for the future that we want to see. So as young people who are truly growing up in the midst of the climate crisis, we have a unique perspective on the climate crisis, and we are the ones who are going to be living with the majority of the impacts of the climate crisis. And so it's really important that we listen to young people and acknowledge their perspective in kind of leading the way on what kind of future we want to create. And so then we have kind of a side note on tokenism that comes with this. And so tokenism is participation for show where young people have little or no influence, and it can be difficult to avoid when adult-led organizations elicit input from youth without empowering them as decision makers. So tokenism can show up in a lot of different ways, and it can happen to lots of different people. But essentially what tokenism is diversity without inclusion. And so it's not enough just to ask youth to show up in your space, but we have to empower youth to make decisions and to lead in that space. Tokenism is obviously really harmful, and it makes people feel used and inherently devalues their perspective. If you have someone there, if you have this diversity without inclusion, then you're inherently making that person's perspective less valuable and not letting it take up the space and have the importance that it should have. And so if you are to invite youth into your space, make sure that you're doing so intentionally. Like I said, we're not just there to check a box. And also know that if you do have a young person in your space, one young person doesn't represent the whole community. And it's important to not put the kind of pressure of the entire youth perspective on one young person, because it's so much more than that. And then additionally, when you have young people in your space, allow them to define their own role in that space. As young people, we have different boundaries and different experiences in spaces. And so it's really important that as a young person in a space, you are the one who defines your role, not somebody else. And then for how to fight tokenism, we have to actively listen when youth speak and share their perspectives, and make sure that you're engaging with youth the same way that you would any other individual in that space. And then, like I touched on earlier, acknowledge that one young person doesn't speak for all young people, and that it's important to strive to include more young people in your spaces and not just like stop at one person. And also, we will send out more information regarding youth tokenism after this meeting. And then lastly, on this kind of pillar, we have this chart about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and kind of asking the right questions. So diversity asks who is in the room. Diversity is just like who is there, what groups of people are there. And then equity asks who is trying to get in the room but can't, and what are the boundaries. So if you have a meeting at like 12 p.m. during the day, then there probably aren't going to be any young people there because they're going to be at school, and that's a barrier that doesn't allow young people to be in that space. And so equity is about breaking down those barriers and making sure that everybody who is trying to get into the room can be there. And then inclusion is about have everyone's ideas been heard, respected, and understood. So once we have these different people and different ideas in a space, are all of them truly being valued and listened to and respected? And then lastly, belonging asks, is everyone feeling valued through positive connections with others and able to bring the authentic self to work? And so we want to constantly be striving to form these positive connections between each other, and always checking in and making sure that everybody is feeling valued and that everybody is truly able to bring their full self to each space. And with that, I'm going to pass it off to Phoebe.
Hello again. Thank you so much, Emma. So well said. It's so important, and you said it so well. So one of our, I think this is our last pillar. No, it's not. Never mind. That's wrong. Never mind. I think that's right. Anyway, doesn't matter. Here is rest is productive and actively combating burnout. Like I mentioned in the beginning, we know that burnout has to be actively combated in order for it to, stay away. So one way to actively combat burnout is to respect and appreciate each other. So many of us and everyone feels burnout. It's, especially in the climate movement, it's horrible and it's really overwhelming. Many youth specifically face burnout from things that we've talked about in the earlier parts of this presentation about tackling these difficult issues and feeling tokenized and being in adult dominated spaces that don't have policies, don't have the correct things in place to make sure that youth are not being burnt out by this space. Youth have so much that they are doing already with school and the rest of the world, and not to say that that's not to do anything to say that adults aren't doing the same thing, but it is very specific for this. So when we're talking to youth about burnout and trying to actively combat burnout, make it sure and make it known and tell these youth and all of the people in your spaces that you appreciate them, respect them, and value them and the work that they're doing. And a little appreciation always goes a long way. So something that we do specifically in YAC that I find so great and that I love about our space that I find hard to find in other spaces is that work is not just, specifically climate work is not just about being productive and professional. It's about having a community and having fun together. It should be done effectively, but also have more fun. I don't think I've ever left a YAC meeting where I hadn't felt energized or had fun afterward, because I love going to YAC meetings and we have such great people and we just have fun together. And having that feeling afterward makes us feel better and helps reduce that burnout. So make sure that we're respecting and appreciating each other. Many youth face burnout specifically. Oh, sorry, I already did this. So make sure that you are learning and make that space for youth to share and learn, because a lot of youth come into the climate movement without other prior experience. And many youth can feel very nervous and very pressured by other people to represent the whole community, which is wrong. And so when we're having fun and working together and you create space to learn and share in your spaces, it helps make that learning curve smoother for youth activists. And make sure this is not just in youth spaces. You need to be doing this in all of your spaces. Be mindful of capacity. Youth are just as busy as adults. And when asking a young person if they can do something, ask if they have capacity for it. Never shame an individual if they have capacity for something. There is no shame for being full and having other things. And make sure that when you're taking on tasks and when you're giving people tasks, you're being mindful of burnout. So lead by example. Adults can say no too. So let's be an adult ally. Am I passing this to someone? No? Okay, perfect. Awesome. This is what I thought. So be an adult ally. let's hear from Valley and Chelsea, who are both awesome and amazing adult allies who support YAC and have been super great mentors for me specifically and others. I'm going to introduce Valley so that he can go to bed because he is in Scotland right now and it is 1 a.m. So Valley has been super great. He was our first YAC intern. He has been really great in trying to make these spaces for youth to share and learn, create space for them, make sure that we're talking about these things, staying up late to listen to us, and making sure that there is lots of space for us. He has been really great and we love him with our whole heart. And now I'm going to have him share.
Yeah, thank you so much, Phoebe. I'm so happy to be here and so glad that this is a space. And I think before I jump in and give my brief 2 or 3 minute little spiel, I just want to give a moment for all the youth that came together to put on this webinar. And I know there's been a lot of information, a lot of great information, but I hope everyone on the call will join me and share some words of appreciation in the chat if you have a second for the wonderful people that are here with me today. So thank you to y'all. And with that, yes, already some great comments coming in. Thank you so much. I just want to really share a couple stories because I like stories about several of the people on this call. So the first story is that when I first joined this organization only a couple months ago, I had a meeting with Phoebe, and I really just wanted to know how to do my job better. And I think that sometimes as adults, when we speak to youth, there's a voice in our head that says, this person is younger than me, and maybe this person doesn't know as much as me. And I think when you shut off that voice and you listen and you really just try and, take that person as someone that has good information and good advice to give, you can learn so much. So I walked away from that hour or so meeting with Phoebe wanting to change the way that I did my job. And I just felt like I learned so much, and the perspective was so informative. And I don't tell this story at all to, boost Phoebe's ego or my own. I tell this story because I think I want to illustrate that asking youth for advice is so valuable and so important because they have some really great advice to give. And again, I just encourage the adults in this work, to shut off that voice as they're speaking to youth and just meet them where they're at. So that's story number one. And story number two has to do with Riley. And Riley and I had a really great conversation here this last week. And the background on this, the brief background, is that Riley works in Northern Colorado and secured this amazing grant from the EPA to do air quality testing up there. And it's really, really incredible. Everyone give her a round of applause virtually. And so Riley told me this story about she was working with these people at the EPA, and the man that Riley was talking to was basically, on board. They were having a great conversation, and then suddenly, after this man realized that Riley was a youth, his whole perspective changed and suddenly was not treating Riley in the way that they should be treated. And I think I bring up that story. It was really powerful for me because it's the way that we should not be allies to the youth, and that no matter what age we are, we have important and powerful things to bring to this movement. So yeah, sorry, Patessa, my bad. And so to wrap all that up, I think the thing that I would it's most important to me, the biggest thing that I've learned is to just listen and, to shut off that voice that says young people are idealistic, but they have so much to learn, and yeah, we all have a lot to learn from each other, no matter what our ages are. So thank you for that. And thank you again for the youth on this call, and for everyone that joined. And with that, I will go ahead and pass it off to Chelsea.
Awesome. I'm good to jump in. I can't remember, Phoebe, if you had a buffer in between.
Yeah, I can do that. Yeah, so awesome. Thank you, Valley, for sharing. We love Riley. They are so great. And thank you, Valley. You were making me cry. Yeah. So Chelsea is also an awesome ally to the Youth Action Committee as a whole, and also to myself. Chelsea has been my mentor at 350 for the past year or so. I think we've been mentors to each other in some way. She is so great, and we love her very much. She has been so great at amplifying youth voices in 350 Colorado. She has also been super helpful in supplying support and resources to the youth in our Youth Action Committee and to myself. Yeah, she's been a super great ally. And yeah, Chelsea, take it away.
Thank you, Phoebe. Yes, thank you, everyone, to Echo Valley and all the ripples of gratitude that keep spreading. There's never a limit to that, right? It always feels good. And I loved being asked to be a part of this tonight, and was really honored in so many ways, because as it's been shared, adults like myself have so much to learn from youth, and that has been my exact experience since being in the role in September 2021. I was so fortunate to meet Phoebe very shortly after that, and from the moment I met them, blew me away. I'll try not to go down that full rabbit hole, but with these 3 points that were put on the screen for me to share, I just felt giddy that I could think of instances in which this has happened. And just to speak really briefly to that, as Valley did, you know, with that first element there of being there, it sounds so simple, but in so many ways, that's where you start, right? You show up either physically on that Zoom or physically in person. And this has taken so many shapes and forms with YAC and members of YAC. And, you know, whether that be being at planning meetings or being at those bi-monthly meetings that YAC puts on. It could be the actual events themselves, like the For Our Future conference that was put on for the first time last fall. That was so cool to be there and help run the event with all the other organizers in Valley, and just really live in that moment. And even rallies, there's been at least a couple rallies now that were either led and organized by YAC or at least supported, and being there and saying, tell me what to do, tell me what to do is such a good feeling. And I really invite all adults to lean into that too, if you're not already. When it comes to amplifying youth voices, you know, this takes a lot of different shapes and forms as well. One simple way that I started doing this was making sure that during our monthly staff calls, we were explicitly sharing out updates from the Youth Action Committee. That hadn't been a hard and fast practice up until that point. And of course, that was creating this kind of uncertainty maybe, or a shadow over, well, what is YAC up to? And why won't we make that a clear line of communication in that one simple way? It could also be just making the right connections, as was shared earlier, around resource sharing, as I'll move into here in a second. If I'm ever reached out for speaking on a panel or speaking on a webinar or coming into a classroom, I make sure to explore those avenues where I can with youth leaders to see if they can be a part of it. Or maybe I can talk to that organizer and get that opportunity to be a little bit more accessible, right? If it's middle of the day, not all students are going to be able to drop their class and just come to that. So using my power, hopefully, in my position to be able to move that needle a little bit. And offering support and resources. Yeah, this was also touched on. That could be giving car rides, working on resumes, or being a letter of reference for someone. Just to highlight, make sure that youth that you're working with know that that's on the table. Don't kind of leave that up to the imagination. Be really proactive in asking youth if they need anything like that, that would be helpful. And also not taking it personally if they don't, but making it clear that you're there for them if they change their mind, or if they have a friend or someone else needs some support. Having regular check-ins too is something that I've really enjoyed in my role so much. Making that time to just not only talk about what's happening in our organizing our efforts, but what is happening in their personal life that they're willing to share with me, that I'm making a safe enough space to share about. You can't assume that youth are just going to give you every single detail about what's going on with them, but at least if you're asking what they're up to, what they're passionate about, what's been a difficult thing they've been working on, you could have a lot of different avenues to open that up, but making that a regular part of your check-in and supportive work, and not just, again, kind of forgetting about it, or only checking in every couple, months or so. Something more regular is bound to be more supportive. So yeah, maybe the last thing I'll say as a quick story to how Valley shared was that last year around this time, after we came off of a really exciting kind of campaign and push with the Youth v Gov film support that we were providing, as well as divestment through Chase Bank and other big bankers of the fossil fuel industry. I had a little spring party at my place, and I still think of that day whenever I really need like a pick-me-up, because we picnicked in the backyard and just played games, and it was so simple at the end of the day just to offer up my backyard and offer to cook a couple things. And I just think of how regenerative that was too, after coming off of a lot of a really incredible work and efforts from many people on this call too. So I'll end it there. I could go so much longer, but thank you again for the space and this amazing opportunity tonight.
Okay, I think this is where I come in. So we're just going to lay out everything that we've basically talked about. So just echoing again, what are the steps that you can do to include youth in your spaces? So like we talked about in the beginning, inviting youth into a space that's not safe for them is counterproductive. So in order to create that space, just making sure you're inclusive in all facets, like making sure you're not homophobic, transphobic, racist, obviously all of those things that we touched on earlier. But it's that point is not just saying like, just if it's not safe for youth, just don't include them. It's making sure you make that space into a place that youth can be a part of. Which kind of goes into the second point. Doing the work to implement no tolerance and self-care policies is incredibly important towards making that environment that is safe for youth, and so they can be productive and included in that environment. And then again, collaborating with individuals in the space to set expectations on how the space will operate is really important. I know a lot of youth can get overwhelmed when like entering new spaces of activism if they haven't been involved before, but even if they have, it's still a hard environment to get into. So as well, it's important that both youth and the adults know the expectations for what's going to happen, so both of them can be in the clear and nothing gets lost in translation, especially when it comes to like social policies and making sure that everyone's respected. And setting those expectations for how the space will operate as equals is really important. And then making meetings accessible. Midday meetings often don't work for students or youth. Like I know that I'm a student and I'm in school till 3:30, so I can't do midday meetings. And I'm sure that's the case for a lot of other youth organizers. And so making sure that meetings are, and the second point is talks about after 5 p.m. Oftentimes that's when far past after school ends. So it allows for youth to both have that time after school, but then also to decompress. So it allows them to feel comfortable to join. And that's really important to get youth involved. It has to be accessible to them in the first place. And then consciously inviting youth into spaces. Once that groundwork is set, as we discussed, it's important to have them to show up in the first place. So making sure to reach out to get them involved is really important. I know that I may have not been as active if I hadn't been reached out through email and stuff like that, because it makes youth feel wanted if you reach out to them, and if they're wanted, they'll show up. And then again, inviting youth to meetings, showing them, yes, you're important. Yes, we want to hear your perspective is crucial to making it successful. And then challenge your own ideas. We talked about earlier about the idea of be curious and not judgmental. And if you're feeling uneasy, think about that. Why are you feeling uneasy? And then a lot of this is deconstructing your modes of thought and then re-educating. And education really is the key of this whole thing. Making sure that both you personally are getting educated, but then also adults in your sphere. The next point talks about debriefing with other adults about youth engagement. So that builds that collaboration with other adults, talking about how can we help youth, and then that can go back to the youth and asking them themselves how to do the work. And again, just deconstructing previous notions is the most important thing. Re-education of how you think, like notions of tokens that we talked about earlier, which more information again will be sent out. But understanding why you think that way, your modes of thinking, and then the actions that result from that is really important. So you know how to not, again, act that way in the future, but also how to act more constructively. And then I'll pass it off to Chelsea's to introduce the Q&A and panel discussion.
Thank you, Madeline. And with that, I will also conclude the recording as Phoebe shared at the beginning of the call. That way it's full open space for asking away and using the chat or not. So for those that are watching, thank you.